Good evening, race fans. Chris Terrell here with Jagerbombs Fantasy Sports, here to talk the start of the DFS NASCAR season here at the Daytona 500. So pretty exciting. We've been through the Cookout Clash, we've been through the duels, we've been through practice, we've been through qualifying. It's now time to kick off the season with the Daytona 500. We had an exciting truck race last night. We had another exciting Xfinity race this afternoon, and now we get ready for the big one, the Daytona 500 tomorrow. A little short notice with the live show. I ended up being busy tomorrow, so I wanted to get this out there tonight just to make sure that it did get out there. And if you don't catch it live, obviously some of you are going to be viewing this on Sunday morning. If you have any questions, not if you're watching the live show, you got any questions, throw them up in the chat. I will go over them while we're live here for the next 20 to 30 minutes. If not, and you're catching this on the replay, definitely get into our Discord chat or hit me up on Twitter at Jaegers_bombs9 or into our Discord. You can also hit me up in the NASCAR channel or in a private message, and I can definitely answer your questions there as well. Without further ado, let's jump in, look at the sheet here. I've got the picks up for this week. Going forward, this is what members are going to see. Green picks, obviously, just as a reminder, going into this season, green picks are going to be the core plays. Blue are going to be the secondary plays. Yellow are going to be the value plays. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the sheet. And if you do want to copy the sheet, I do have a link up here in the chat as well. You can get a DFS NASCAR package or an all sports package. We're currently covering about 10 plus sports right now. So get in, check that out as well. Yeah, so let's start off by looking at where the qualifying came in this week. So obviously, in terms of strategy, as always with the super speedway races like the Daytona, Talladega, and now over the last few years, Atlanta has kind of been converted into that drafting. So it's not exactly a super speedway at a mile and a half, but it does fall into that track type category with the drafting, where we definitely are looking for place differential as our number one strategy for building lineups on DraftKings. So that's kind of where we're going to look, concentrated mostly on DraftKings, but also we will talk some FanDuel because there are some plays that I like a little bit more on FanDuel. So with that in mind, I've got the model updated over here. I need to get practice 2 and 3 updated after this, but what we're really looking at here, most importantly, is that place differential, and I've got that column here in the AX. Got 30% weight on that right now. That just pretty much reverses the order of the qualifying so that you can put in a weight for guys that are going to give you the most upside. And to determine some of that, sometimes what we're also going to go over is a little refresher on the DK and FanDuel fantasy matrix that I built. It is the secondary tab right here beside the main cheat sheet. It's going to allow you to kind of analyze driver versus driver and see who has the best floor, the best upside, and we will talk about that as well as we move into this a little bit more. On the preview show, I showed you also these other tabs, the track history, the track type history, the form tab. You can definitely go through all of those and do your research as well. If you want, go back and look at that video. I explained kind of how I go about using these other tabs for my research. But with that, I'm going to try and go through as many picks, lineup builds as I possibly can. I might give you kind of a core that I'm going to be looking at here this week, and then all of our other cores will be posted on the sheet as well as in our chat tomorrow morning, probably 1 to 2 hours before the start of the race. All right, so looking at the qualifying, some of my core drivers in terms of, let's just look at the overall ranking in the model here right now. Alex Bowman sits at number 1. He started in 38th. He's been really consistent at Daytona, 16th, 2nd, 6th, 5th, and 14th over his last 5 races. He's only crashed out once in his last 10, been involved in the crash. So he knows how to stay out of the big one, and he's always getting inside that top 10. So starting 38th, he just provides us not only elite place differential, but he comes at a mid-tier price on both sites as well, making it, a very nice way to start your lineups without costing you a whole bunch. And in terms of strategy, another thing that we always talk about is don't worry about leaving money on the table. The place differential definitely is going to drive a lot of ownership. So if you want to leave some money on the table, that's going to help possibly separate you from the field in terms of ownership and having maybe a little bit more of a unique lineup. But if you go with all 6, say, place differential plays, you're probably going to have a high owned lineup. And there still is a lot of variance at these tracks. We usually see 1 or 2 big ones, usually 5 to 10, sometimes even half the field. being eliminated sometime during the race. So with that high variance, I like playing usually like a 20 max versus just a single entry on some of the other races in terms of cash games. I'm more looking at doing a 20 max and mixing in the core guys that I like. So Alex Bowman's definitely up there. Number 2 in my model is Kyle Busch starting 21st, but I personally like he's been a lot more consistent than Brad Keselowski, who's actually probably one of my top 3 favorites this week, starting 34th. He's got that elite place differential value, but what I do like in this situation is that obviously Brad Keselowski is going to be a little bit higher owned starting back in 34th, whereas Kyle Busch starting 21st. That's 13 points. So if they were both to win the race, Keselowski is going to get 13 more points, given that they have the same amount of fast laps and laps led. Let's just say Keselowski is going to give you 13 more points for that place differential on FanDuel or on DraftKings, and then it's half that much on FanDuel because your place differential is only worth half a point over there. So I want to look at the DK fantasy matrix here just a little bit, just to show you what I mean in terms of especially those 2 drivers, because they are the same price. So we're going to jump over here, and what we're going to look at is I'm just going to highlight Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski here. So what we see is how many points they need for 4x, how many they need for 5x, how many they need for 6x. So obviously both of them in the same price point need 55 points for a 6x return, 46 to 46.5 points for a 5x return. Now, what we really see in terms of using this fantasy matrix is Brad Keselowski to get that 6x needs a 11th place finish, whereas Kyle Busch to hit that 6x return needs to get you a 5th place finish. So there's a difference of 6 places there. So that's where I use the fantasy matrix to kind of compare 2 drivers in the same price point to see who gives you the higher floor, who gives you the most upside. Because Kyle obviously winning the race. Now, what you can do if you create your own copy of this sheet, what you can do with this fantasy matrix is also plug in your projected laps led. Not as important on super speedways where we don't see a lot of dominator points. The Xfinity, we definitely see a little bit more trucks as well. It's very rare where we see, a lot of dominator points in terms of the Daytona 500 or any race at Daytona or Talladega for that matter. So I don't really look into it that much. But if you wanted to, you could say Kyle Busch gets up front, maybe leads 20 laps, gives you 5 fast laps. That's going to change all these numbers over here. Well, now that 55 points for that 6x return, he's only needs to give you about an 8th to 9th place finish. So that's how you can go ahead and if you make your copy of the sheet, you can go ahead and adjust that a little bit there as well. So other drivers that really stand out, I got Chase Elliott highlighted here as well. He's a driver that seems to be very up and down here. Like he seems to be either crashing out or giving you, some dominator points obviously in there, which are very rare. I'm going to add Dane here. We got a guest here tonight, the man himself. Dane, how's it going? You're on mute.
Rookie mistake. How are you?
I'm doing great. Decided to do a little NASCAR show tonight because it turns out I'm going to be busy tomorrow morning. So, you feeling any better?
Yeah, a little bit. Coming
You're gonna have
along.
to come on and
Still,
talk some NASCAR.
yeah. I was excited for the weekend. Got to watch most of the Xfinity race today. So, yeah.
Yeah. I was just talking place differential and how important it is here. I talked about Alex Bowman and Brad Keselowski obviously starting 38th and 34th, but especially Bowman at that mid-tier price tag really stands out for me. And then I was just going over the DK fantasy matrix and how we kind of use it to determine. I compared Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski and how it's a 6 spot finishing difference to get the same amount of return on DraftKings at that same price point. Just because obviously Keselowski is 13 spots back. And then the reason I have Chase Elliott highlighted here, I do like him starting 17th. He does have upside, that top 5 upside here. But the reason I have him as a core play is mostly for FanDuel because he comes in at 11,000, and his teammate Kyle Larson a little bit more expensive on DraftKings, but on FanDuel he's only 10,000. So that really stands out to me, especially starting 22nd. How are you going about starting your lineups this week?
Yeah, always one of those weeks where salary just completely doesn't even matter. Like all the super speedways.
Throw it out the window.
Yeah, so leaving, like in Xfinity today, leaving thousands of dollars really doesn't even matter. Limit exposure to the top 10. But, really at the top in Cup here, we've got a lot of guys who are in the mid-teens or even farther back. Like you've got Keselowski and Busch and Elliott, which are all far enough back that I think you can definitely mix them in. Larson as well, like you already mentioned. Blaney, even at 16th, I think is in play. So probably I always like to also do some team stacks or manufacturer stacks in here. And it doesn't have to be like the full team or full manufacturer, but just some mini correlations to where if a couple guys hook up and actually get to the end of the race, that they might pull each other together. And I think that works out a lot of times in these races because other guys, you see clumps of guys wrecking. And if you're 2 or 3 can luckily miss those, you'll end up in a pretty good spot. So the correlation could work out for you or could work against you depending on how it falls. But correlation is always good. So at the top of pricing, at least, I think you're kind of right on where I'm already thinking. The Keselowski, Chase, Kyle Busch, Bell, even. I would say Bowman is going to be heavy chalk in the mid-range. I don't know how do you handle those, because this is something I've always struggled in super speedways with, is guys like Bowman with where they're at 38th. I mean, they're going to be so heavily owned, but they're such good plays, you almost want to go overweight if you're playing multiple lineups. But it can also fall the other way to where they just end up wrecking and it doesn't even matter because there is so much variance. Even though they're good plays, maybe you shouldn't really go overweight on a 30, 40% owned driver in this kind of race. I think that's maybe something that I want to work on, is kind of leveling out exposure on those guys at least and going a little heavier on guys like a Chase who might not be getting so much ownership. I know completely different price range, but again, price doesn't really matter. But one of those, teen guys who, they don't have as much place differential upside, but they should be much lower owned. But how do you look at those plays? I know they're the best overall, just point per dollar, looking at the place differential. But if you were building like a 20 max, how would you handle something like that?
You pretty much just answered it there for me. I'm in normally if we have like a dominator race, maybe a short flat, Martinsville, Phoenix, something like that. If I know a guy's going to be 30, 40% owned, I'm probably going to go overweight on him in that race, thinking that he's going to get those dominator points. With the variance that we see at Daytona, Talladega, I try not to go overweight on those guys. I know that they're going to be higher owned, so in my 20 max, I'll maybe build 5 to 8 lineups, something like that, and kind of stay within the range of what he's probably going to be owned. But I'm not going to go overweight just because I like him and want more than the field on these races, whereas I'll kind of spread out and maybe pick the guys that are the 5 highest owned and try and not build a lineup with 4 of those guys. So say we talk ownership here for a second. We see Alex Bowman, probably Brad Keselowski in there. We're probably going to see some Daniel Suarez, some Martin Truex Jr., even though he's in a new car in that 56. But he does have Cole Pern back this week, so got the Pern star back in action. But let's just say we take those 4 or 5 guys, and they're going to be the highest owned guys. I'm generally only going to fit maybe 2 or 3 of those top 4 or 5 ownership guys in the same lineup, where I don't want to be overexposed to all of them. Whereas I'd rather spread out the guys and get 2 or 3 of them in a lineup and build 4 lineups around those 2 or 3, 4 or 5 times, versus being overweight on Brad Keselowski and having him in like 14 lineups, and just kind of saying, I'm going to take Brad. I don't care. I want to have 40 to 60%, while the field's maybe going to have 20 to 30% or whatever the number is. So I'm with you on not going overweight and more spreading out that the variance on this type of racing for sure, because there's just so much variance, and it's a long race, so we're probably going to see multiple wrecks and multiple drivers go out. So I like what you said with like a Chase Elliott who's in the teens, starting 17th. That's half the place differential. But if Brad is 40% owned and he ends up crashing out, sure, you maybe lose 4 lineups, but now if you've got 4 or 5 Chase Elliott lineups that replace that Brad to kind of be maybe a little bit contrarian. It doesn't really matter that he's half the place differential because Brad's out of the race. So he's not getting that place differential. But now you've got Chase Elliott, even if he doesn't win the race and gets second, you're getting those 15 bonus points, and Brad's out. So I'm definitely with you there, and maybe taking and being a little bit contrarian on a few of those guys starting maybe 15th to 20th instead of guys starting outside of 30th because they're likely going to be 10 to 15% less owned.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, and you mentioned this first very early on there, just limiting how many of those super high on guys you have in a lineup is a way to mitigate that a little bit. I've just got myself in so much trouble at super speedways building multiple lineups like that to where I go 60% or something on a 40% on driver and they end up wrecking. And I'm like, oh, he was such a good play. I should have, but he wrecked.
Then your day's over.
And I'm like, well, dang, he wrecked. I mean, that's what they do here. So, yeah, your day's pretty much over. You just cut yourself, half off. And you're going to lose. If you're building 20, I mean, you're going to lose drivers. But it's just a matter of maybe those plays, you play them slightly under the field instead of trying to get double the field because you can't
exactly
really double the field here. But anyway.
Yep, 100%. And with another way to look at that is I kind of feel that there's two different kinds of drivers at Daytona and Talladega. You've got the guys like Alex Bowman or Christopher Bell, even in most recent years, guys like Kyle Busch, who I talked about early on, who are a little bit more consistent. They're really not going to take the big risks like a Brad Keselowski is going to take a lot of risks, obviously. So he's either finishing top 10, top 5, or crashing out of the race, or creating the crash or whatever. So there's a lot more variance on those kind of drivers. Ryan Blaney's another one where he crashes out a lot, but he's also got to win some top 5, some top 10s in there. So I find there's two different kinds. There's your consistent guy that's going to stay out of the wrecks more often than not, and there's the guys that are going to take risks. Those guys are going to get you the wins, and sometimes maybe better betting on those guys to win the race versus being overweight on them in terms of DFS. And that's where a pivot from Brad Keselowski maybe to a Kyle Busch, maybe losing that 13 spots in place differential upside, but you gain the consistency and your overall percentage of a winning lineup kind of maybe increases with a Kyle Busch. If you're looking at maybe over the long run and talking statistics here, more of a larger sample size than a small sample size. So if you're starting a lineup with, say, Alex Bowman, who is consistent, gives you that elite place differential, kind of checks all the boxes this week, I wouldn't pair him with the Keselowski. I'd rather pivot to, say, a Kyle Busch or a Chase Elliott, like we talked about, or even going up to a Kyle Larson, starting 22nd, because I think a lot of people will float around this mid-range and go with these place differential plays. So that's another way I look at it is the consistency versus the upside guys in terms of what kind of driver they are at super speedway racing.
Yeah, and as we move under 8K, is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. always starting in the 30s when we come to the Daytona 500? Because I'm pretty sure I've been forced into playing him every single year, and you can see there at Daytona how that's fared. He won and then finished in the 30s. He's like the perfect example of what you just talked about. They're either going to win or they're going to wreck.
And take a whole bunch of cars with them.
Yeah, so again, that's a guy that, depending on what his ownership is, maybe I'll go slightly less than the field instead of trying to get overweight. Even though he's starting in the 30s, maybe you go slightly underweight because you've got right below him Suarez, Truex, and Barry right above him. I think Truex being in this car, I almost think that helps him in this race. That he's not running all year because he's not worried about anything other than this, and he wants to be there at the end. And I think they'll have a strategy in place to be there, their best to be there at the end by being much more conservative. So obviously he's one of the better plays at the starting position. But I'll let you talk through that range there. That's a pretty condensed range right there with plays. They're just in the 7Ks.
And I think Truex, I think the team he's driving for, is it Tricon? I think that's what they're called. So yeah, I agree with you there that this is a one-off race for him. This is a one-off race for the team. It's a one-off race for Cole Pern. I think it's a really big deal for them. If they were to finish top 10, that would be big for that small team. And I think he knows that, and he's the perfect driver for that kind of team. In this kind of race, because as you can see, he's been very consistent. He's not getting into those wrecks. He knows how to finish. I know some of these 24th place finishes are probably ended up in a wreck near the end of the race after the first few wrecks, and that's why they're 24th. I don't exactly remember how those races panned out, but he is very consistent with those top 15s, 5 in his last 7 races here. So I definitely like Truex. I think he's probably going to be the highest owned in that range, or very close with Suarez, and both give you that elite place differential. Ricky Stenhouse, again, that's going to be like GPP only. So if I was building 20 lineups, I'd probably not having more than 2 Ricky Stenhouse lineups in there. I just think the downside of him getting in a wreck with his aggressiveness, it definitely outweighs the upside. Like that one win and only one other top 20, well, 2 other top 20s, the 20th of the Daytona 500 in 2020. So definitely not him. But Truex and Suarez probably number 1 in ownership. I think then you probably see Josh Berry in the Wood Brothers 21. I think he's a good play, even though he hasn't finished better than 22nd, and his finishes have actually got worse over the last 3 races, 2 years at Daytona. But I think he provides that upside in that car. This is his first year in that number 21, so I think he wants to start the year very good. So I think he could be one of those sleepers that I might even try and bet on. I'd love to see the Wood Brothers go back to victory lane here. Do you remember the last Daytona win with the Wood Brothers 21 car? I can't remember who it was, but it was like, I want to say 6-7 years ago. Can you help me out there? I can't Google it in time.
I can picture him. He ran in Cup for a year or 2 more, and then he was never heard from again. And I'm completely blanking on.
Was it the Daytona 500? I'm positive it was the
Daytona 500. It was the Daytona 500. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't even find it with a quick Google search while I'm trying to talk here. So if anyone knows it, throw it up in the chat. If not, I'm going to find it before the show's over. And
I can't believe we're blanking on it.
This is something I should have written down.
He ran an Xfinity last year too. I remember the name.
Yep, he did. Oh, it's driving me nuts. Anyways,
Trevor Banks.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's him. So I could definitely see a scenario like that again. Maybe not where he disappears, but I think Josh Berry is going to definitely be around for a while. So I definitely like him a lot. He's probably Truex and then Berry, then Suarez is how I rank them, probably in terms of my own personal player pool. I think Ty Gibbs makes a good play. He's probably going to be the lowest owned out of those 5 that I really like in that range. He's actually been very good here, 5th, 17th, 25th, and 13th. So two top 20 finishes, and I think he's usually starting. I think his average start is outside of top 20 there as well. So I think he provides some upside starting 23rd, kind of like a Chase Elliott or a Kyle Busch in that range of starting positions, but obviously comes at a lot lower cost. Makes a lot of sense. And then you can definitely play stars and scrubs, like getting multiple of these guys near the top, because we have a huge value range this week. I'll let you talk about it here in a second, but obviously I'm targeting the place differential down here, and you almost have to, because these guys aren't normally going to get you they're usually not going to get you a top finish. It's very rare. Like the odds of them contending for the win are probably a little bit lower, but the odds of them getting and returning that place differential value, I think, is a lot better in terms of DFS. So I like the 6K range with Gregson, Haley, and Hochaver. Probably, I don't know who I like more out of those. So this is probably a scenario where I'm going to mix in them probably pretty evenly. But the guys that I think are going to garner a lot more is the 5K range in terms of ownership. Like Zane Smith started 37th. He's finished 13th in all 3 races here at Daytona that he's raced here. Jimmy Johnson won some Daytona 500s, obviously 7-time champion. He is in the 84 car here again. I don't know. He's starting dead last. I mean, he won't start dead last because a lot of cars are going to backup cars. It's definitely there, but I think he may see some ownership over Zane Smith. So I definitely like Zane Smith a little bit more. And then Cody Ware started in 28th. I think he's probably the lowest owned of that range, but he's min price. And look at his track record here. He's been awesome at Daytona. 4th, 14th, 6th, 17th, 29th, and 21st in his over his last 10 races, 8 of those last 10. So how do you feel about that 6K and 5K range?
Yeah, definitely, like you said, you got to target the place differential plays in here. I think Kosovar is one of those that I would classify as he's very boomer bust. Seems like he's very aggressive when it comes to things like this. So even early in the race, I just don't think he's at this point got enough experience to say anything otherwise. So I think he's going to be aggressive from the time they drop the green flag, which scares you, but also gives him upside. But it almost, to me, would classify like a Stenhouse type play. Haley, we know he's been good here in the past and decent in Cup, but Xfinity he was really good. Gregson with the new team. You could pair him up with a Zane Smith as the front row combination. Who's the other driver now at front row? I'm blanking. It's not McDowell anymore.
Todd
Gillen still. So
he's
Zane,
coming off a good year.
Gregson, and Gillen. Yeah, so like those three that's an interesting. Gillen's starting a little too far forward, but you could pair the Gregson and Zane together. That's an interesting pairing back in the 30s that you could hope pull each other together. Jimmy, you mentioned him. I mean, good place differential. Probably not a guy I'm going to go super overweight on. Just kind of seems like he can't catch a break when he's came back in these races, but maybe he can. I mean, we know he can do it. I think it's more so just getting used to this new car for him. Cody Ware, like you said, really good option there. He just kind of rides around and is there at the end. The other guy that I would add to the pool that you don't have highlighted right now would be Custer. I think that's I think he's a pretty good option here. I mean, he's got a solo team for the year. They seem solely focused on him. I mean, they don't have anybody else to focus on the Haas team. So I think that could make some sense. And he's starting 30th, and, he can link up with some of these Fords too somewhere, but I think he's in play. Some of the other guys, I'll just touch on them. I just think some of the people that you kind of want to stay away from in here that have decent place differential. SVG, I don't think he's just not had enough of these races for me to get behind him here. I mean, he's not going to be very owned. That would probably be the only argument for him at starting 26th, and the fact of what I just said is probably going to keep his ownership a little lower. So if you were running a bunch of teams, you could mix him in, but I don't really like that. And then Castro Neves is the other one, the same exact idea there. These are just not races to where if you've not done it before, in most cases, you're not just going to come in here and reel off a great finish. There's just so much variance, so much luck in some cases, but also putting yourself in the right spots. You got to put yourself in the right spots. I mean, people have shown the ability to do that over the years. Denny Hamlin, Dale Earnhardt, Dale Jr. If you think back to some of the best Daytona super speedway racers, they put themselves in great spots or they wouldn't be around for that many at the end. So when you get the unexperienced drivers, and you see this in Xfinity and trucks all the time, that's why there's so many wrecks in those two series at these tracks, and it's just because of inexperience. So those are a couple guys that I'd probably stay away from in that range.
Yeah, I agree with you there as well. I think Castro Neves is just starting 41st is probably going to take a little bit of ownership, but I'm definitely off him without his experience and here at Daytona for sure. So it's now we'll move on to building some lineups, and I've actually built one that I like in terms of teammate stacking. You talked about Zane Smith and Gregson, so I went ahead and put them in a lineup right off the bat, and then I went a very contrarian route. Those two are obviously going to take a lot of ownership. So what I did was I went and paired Elliott and Larson together, started 22nd and 17th. Now that leaves you 9K in salary. So as you can see, we've got two teammates twice put into a lineup for stacking. Now you can pretty much do whatever you want with that lineup. Like I would probably end up going because I think you're already diverting and getting away from some of that ownership and some of those common builds with the Elliott Larson stack that I think you can go ahead and throw Bowman in there as well, and still going to leave you 9,800. So you can have everyone but Denny Hamlin.
Get the
so
3-man.
Yeah,
Hendrick.
exactly. 3 Hendricks, and then if you want to go with somebody else, I mean, you don't even have to go with Bowman. If you really want to get away from the ownership, you could definitely go down. This is where you could maybe take a Stenhouse or throw a Ty Gibbs in there even. I think, like I said, he's probably one of the lowest in terms of that range, that 7,200 to 7,700 range. So there's a bunch of different ways you can go, but I definitely like your idea of stacking teammates, stacking manufacturers together in this race. Like you said, it can go really good where they all help each other and one team does really good at these races. It can also go really bad where obviously they're all going to be together. So if the big one happens and one of them's in the wreck, there's a very good chance that they're all going to be in the wreck. So, but I'm still willing, if I'm taking my chances here, that's the way I'm going, is kind of going with teammates. And Larson and Elliott kind of starting closer together. I think they have a really good chance of hooking up early, possibly even getting out front eventually here and leading some laps between them. Not that, like I said, that's a big deal at these races, but every little point matters. So if they can even garner another 10 to 20 DFS points between the two of them in fast laps and laps led, I think that helps as well. So that's something else that happens when you get teammates together, is they can push each other to the lead and kind of stay out front for multiple laps without seeing any cautions or anything come, and you can get those extra bonus points if it comes down to splitting with 45 people, or maybe you had that stack where you had a few more of those fast laps and laps led. You can kind of separate yourself a little bit, but that's one core that I like sticking together for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the other another one of the manufacturer stacks that I'd throw out there is, if you think of some of these single or lower teams, they will not work with certain drivers at the end of the races.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think of like Truex, his teammates from last year are going to trust him, So even though he's not in a JGR car, Hamlin, Bell, those guys are going to work with him at the end if he's up there. So don't hate that to throw him in some Toyota stacks.
100%. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions, anyone that's tuning in, thank you again for tuning in. Really, really appreciate it. Especially on the short notice that we put the show out. We're going to try and do these shows every week. Daytona's a little different. We were able to get it done just a little bit early. Going forward, it might stick on this Saturday night kind of theme, just because Sunday mornings become very, very busy, and we just want to make sure that we're going to be consistent and kind of give you guys a show every week, because it does allow us to kind of go over, gives us time to talk about the qualifying, gives us time to kind of go over, look at the DK fantasy matrix, decide who we like there. Just gives us, we want to have the most information possible before we come on and we start talking drivers and how to build lineups and stuff like that. Kind of like we used to. So we're going to get back to that consistency of doing these shows. So you can kind of expect it for now. I mean, we're going to talk about it. We'll announce it in chat and on Twitter as well, or X, sorry, when we're going to do it. But I think Saturday night's probably going to work best for both of us as of right now. Sometimes it might be solo shows, but we're going to try and keep that going for you guys. So stay tuned to us at Jaeger_bombs9 on Twitter. And like I said, if you want to get a copy of this cheat sheet every week and see these plays each and every week, we've got another tab with all of our core plays. Rankings go up there. We have truck sheet. We have an Xfinity sheet. We have our Discord chat. We've also covering 10 plus sports as well. So if you're into more than just NASCAR, you can sign up for an all sports package, which is the price of just 2 singular sports. And we kind of cover that all. We've got 4 or 5 different coaches in there. So come and join us in Discord, join our winning team, and we're ready for another strong NASCAR season. Dane, thanks for joining me. That was an awesome surprise, especially, again, on all this short notice. Thank you to everyone, especially yourself, for jumping in.
Yeah, always a fun week, and looking forward to a great season.
Yes, for sure.
Excited to be able to link up on some of these shows more often again this year.
Yep. 100%. Like I said, I think Saturday night probably works best for both of us. Might be a little bit later going forward, kind of like our golf shows, somewhere around 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So yeah, just stay tuned. We'll announce that going into next week's race and moving forward, and we'll try and keep it a consistent time and day for everyone. And like I said, if you're looking for more information, you have any more questions, either throw it in the YouTube chat here or jump into our Discord or hit us up on Twitter. We will make sure to answer your questions and help you build your lineups going into the Daytona 500 tomorrow. And with that, good luck, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
Good luck, everybody.